Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Fractional Edge podcast, where we talk about workforce planning and how fractional executives give you the competitive edge that your business really needs.
Welcome to the Fractional Edge, the turbocharged podcast that's your one-way ticket to unlocking the full potential of your workforce planning. I'm your host, Carol Fraser, a workforce planning whiz, fractional chief human resources officer, and a CEO who's been around the block and probably tripped over a few HR manuals along the way. With over 4 successful ventures under my belt, I've mastered the art of navigating the challenges faced by small and medium-sized businesses like yours. Get ready to dive deep into the exhilarating world of fractional executive staffing strategies, where every twist and turn is designed to turbocharge your business success and leave you ready to supercharge your company. From hilarious success stories to side-splitting strategies, we've got the inside scoop to optimize your business and keep you grinning from ear to ear. Let's rev up those engines and dive headfirst into the fast lane of business brilliance.
Today, I have 2 guests with me. Why? Because they also have an amazing podcast called Fractional.fm. My first person I'll introduce is Lance Robbins. He is a fractional people leader. And I have Joshua Wold, who is a fractional product lead. So Lance, tell the world a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Excited to be here with you. Fun to be on this side of the studio for a change. So yeah, like you said, a fractional people leader, which means I do a lot of different things in a leadership role as it relates to human resources, workplace experience, that experience design component, and most specifically specializing in those remote and distributed and hybrid workplaces that can be a little bit tricky. So I work with large organizations to help them, develop and implement best practices around that. And I work with smaller organizations on the more traditional HR side of things.
Gotcha. So you're trying to help break a lot of assumptions in past practices so that people actually can continue to work hybrid or remote.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And essentially what it is, I think, and by and large, is change management. Right? We're changing the way that we do things. And rather than a consultant, which I'm sure you've talked on your show at length about the differentiation between consultant and freelance and fractional, is that I can also help not just bring the new ideas and the strategic path forward for an organization, but then I can either lead a team or lead the implementation of those changes over the long haul for that company. That's where I really find my sweet spot and how it ties in so well with this fractional concept that we're talking about.
Yeah, Lance and I were working together for years at a previous organization, and he basically started helping to do that there with another mutual friend of ours. And we would just talk regularly about all the things we were excited to change, the frustrations that we couldn't change. And so it's been really neat to watch him just continue his career and help that with more organizations. And that's why we love to chat, like just to complain about and try to find ways to fix and help people.
Yeah, that's so important because it's the stickiness factor. You can go in with great ideas and you can kind of, lift up the big rock. But then if there's nobody there to continue to hold it or break it into smaller parts for a longer period, stuff just doesn't stick. So Josh, who are you? Tell me a little bit about you being a fractional product lead.
So I'll just start off right now by saying I'm a failed fractional. And I think it's great to be open with that because the world is not perfect. So I learned about this fractional world a couple years ago. I was so excited and I got a chance to try it last year. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I was helping with product design and strategy at tiny startups for about 8 months. And the autonomy and freedom I felt, I was just giddy and terrified, excited, and Lance got all that in text messages from me every day as I went over that roller coaster. And then I ran out of sales, and so I got a day job. When we do interviews, I'm always asking our guests, how do you find new leads? Because it's a problem that I ran into. But with that said, I'm an aspirational fractional because I love to learn more about this world, why I failed, how I can continue to figure this out. That's a little bit about me. And I also just realized with Lance having the mustache and you having the pink hair, I need something. I need to figure out something. So I love it.
That was your problem, Joshua. It was your branding. It was off.
No branding.
Yeah. No, this is a lot of fun too, because then bringing this all together, right? Like I've been on my journey for the last couple of years, establishing my practice, which hasn't failed yet, but it's not the place where I want it to be. It's still growing. And I've had some close scrapes. I've been calling Josh for like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep doing this, but so it's just definitely a work in progress. We don't have it figured out. And so we just started sharing all the stuff that we were sharing together publicly as a podcast. And then we started bringing in people so that we could learn their secrets and understand better how they run their fractional practices and businesses and what can we learn from that. And so we've built our audience around that. But ultimately, we did this podcast concept because it was fun for us. And as long as it's fun for us, we'll keep going.
If I may, every time we stop the recording with our guests, we'll kind of like, hey, how's business really going? And it's so helpful to hear that many other people are stressed. They're not sure they've got it figured out. They're trying to share confidence externally, which is fantastic, but they're also trying to wrestle with things internally. And that actually helps me feel better that I don't need to have everything figured out while I'm on this journey.
It is definitely a journey. And I think that one of the big boulders that we're going to try to move in the coming, call it year, is the education to the business owner is key. But I actually just wrote a blog for Taylor Crane's newsletter.
Taylor's awesome.
I know he's awesome. I think we could help move this into a more solidified manner if we hand the reins over to the employer and do what we can to educate the employer and empower the employer. I kind of created this little checklist. So right now we're the ones who are selling fractional, right? And we want to kind of shift it so that they're seeking fractional. And I think we need to kind of consider changing the vernacular, changing the energy to be, no, you're totally in charge. No, you've got this. No, this is a benefit to you, but you just tell us when you need it. And here's a checklist on what you can ask a fractional. Here's a checklist on how you can onboard a fractional. Here's a checklist on how you integrate a fractional. I think it's really difficult with us always being the ones to try to educate the business owner on how it works. I think we need to come the other side and say, let us just teach you how to do this. Then you can choose to do it. But now you're back in the driver's seat. I think, at least in my experiences and talking to my guests, a lot of them are just so weary and really uncertain because they haven't had the opportunity to like read the book, right? All the fractionals are reading the book, but the people who own the businesses aren't reading the book yet. And so we've got to kind of find a way to write their book so that they feel like they're back in charge of how they run their companies, so to speak. That's just my 2 cents.
And one of the things we've seen with some guests that we've talked to is they're not strictly fractional in a specific definition of the word. They're helping multiple organizations at a strategic level every day. And they're like, oh, sure, I guess that's fractional. I don't even think about it that way. Here's what I've been doing. And what I've been trying to do is see, can I widen the net of this definition to encompass more people doing really helpful things at that strategic level for startups? It's an ongoing exploration right now.
That's a really good point, because like we just had a guest last week who uses a totally different label for what she's doing.
Subscription designer.
Mm-hmm. It seems to resonate. It's easy for people to understand. And when I say, like, I was at an event yesterday and somebody says, oh, well, tell me what you do. And, I tried to like stumble through this explanation of what a fractional is. And he looked at me like I had 3 eyeballs, and by the time I was done, he says, oh, that's interesting. I never even knew that was a thing or never thought about that. You work your whole career and it just never crosses your mind. And so to your point about education, I think people just don't yet know that it's out there. When we talk to founders, I think it's part of the thing is that they hadn't considered this as an option. Obviously, your focus on talent planning.
Yeah.
Have you considered fractional? Because most people haven't.
Right. It's just that, as we all know, just differentiating that just ever so slightly from a consultant, because consultants leave. And we just want to do a lot of the great work that consultants can bring in. But we'll integrate a little bit more so that we kind of see how each one of the little things that might be a shift are sticking and impacting. And then we'll just stay here as long as we need to until you grow to the size that you want. And then when it's time for you to get maybe a full-time person of this ilk, then, we could always help you with that as well. So I think it's like we're trying to all have this mission, but I think too often we're in the sales seat of selling ourselves, which again, everybody is, right? But just thinking to the mindset, that human behavior where you want to be in control of who you bring on board. I think if we can kind of go from that psyche, I think it might help a little bit.
I love that. And I've had a lot of great fractional projects, but one that I really enjoyed was actually a lead from Lance, where they pulled me in as a fractional to help to figure out design strategy and direction. And after 8 months, they asked me to come on full time. It didn't make sense logistically. So I actually hired my replacement. And she is an amazing designer who's actually doing better than I probably would have done. And that was a successful engagement. It went really well. I would take 10 more of those. It was fantastic.
Well, it's a perfect segue. So, Josh, prior to you putting a hiatus on your fractional journey,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about the clients that you usually work with and what kind of, what's your ICP if you want to go down that route. But really, what is your magic? What is it that you bring that makes you and that really helps to impact the businesses that you work with?
I love that. And I still offer fractional, but I'm not doing it full time. I want to throw that in the beginning just to get people's ear that it's okay to fail. But I do have a day job, which means I'm limited, right? I have a little bit of availability outside of that. The ideal customer profile for me is a tiny team of 3 people. There's some flexibility. It could be 10, but not very large, where I'm working directly with the chief product person or the CEO, and we're wrestling with the term is 0 to 1, right? A tiny little idea that we want to see if it has legs so that they can raise another round, get seed money, get a Series A. That's so fun because I'll go from we're wrestling with an idea to maybe get more customers, get more eyeballs on something. I'll sketch it, design something very simple, and we'll have it in code the next day. And then we'll learn from it. And that's just such a fun space for me because I don't love spending 10 months getting the perfect UI on the perfect components and then 6 months later getting the data back. Like I'm getting too old. I don't have time for that anymore. So for me, I would rather do that quick iteration where we fail very fast, maybe in a couple days, we learn, we tweak and go forward again. And where I've had another really great project I had last year, 2 founders, they're both engineers. They came to me, we chatted, we tried out a product that was based on a massive company that took a major shift. And so the API got disconnected and we canceled after a month. We tried a second one, we canceled. The third one is an up and running startup right now, which is doing really well as a tiny little startup. And they occasionally reach out, we tweak little things. They don't need a full-time designer, but about once or twice a year, they're saying, hey, we need your help for a few months. Can you help us to continue to iterate on this? I love that. That is so fun for me.
That is cool. So it's really in the tech world that you kind of play around, not so much a service world or a other kind of product like a fruit.
So far, the success I have had is with tech startups, SaaS-based, couple consumer, where they want to try an idea that's going to be building an app of some sort, maybe a web app, maybe a mobile app, and they need to just quickly find out if the market's going to like that. And we'll wrestle through that. And where I specialize is my iPad has probably thousands of sketches at this point that I do by hand, where we have a problem. I'm going to draw it out by hand, show it to the founders. We're going to wrestle through it. And a good day is where I never have to open Figma. If you're a designer, that means something to you right now because Figma is very controversial at the moment, what they're doing. I'll use it. I have used it. It's my second tool, but my first tool is drawing by hand to just try to understand the term is UX, the user experience of the problem. And that's something I absolutely love. And once I've solved that problem, I kind of want to move on. So that's why it's great to be a fractional. Like, hey, can someone else work on all the little details and I want to work on the next problem? So I digress. I love that.
This is great. But I like Figma, so I'll have to find out what the dirty laundry is on that one.
The big thing is just some changes they're making with subscriptions and some licensing issues. And that's not as frustrating as Adobe right now, thankfully. But
yeah, the tech world is definitely taking advantage of our times right now.
Yes.
So Lance, what about you? Who are your clients? What is your specific magic? I mean, look, now this is where I think I probably could talk forever with you. I have done my research and in my little head, I really see 26 distinct specialties in human resources. And it's kind of hard to be an expert in all of them. So I'm so curious on what you think the magic is that you bring. And then what kind of clients do you bring it to?
That's such a great data point. I've not looked into that, so I'd be curious how you map that out. I kind of try to take a step back a little bit from human resources. I talk about human resources, people leadership, because I think that's what the market can understand. And it's a service that someone can grab onto. What my secret magic sauce is that I'm able to quickly take in the lay of the land, the context, what's going on, identify problems and identify solutions. I can broker collaborations across different groups of people and find a path forward and then shepherd that path forward. So it's really about solutions and problem solving. The area of the business that I tend to do that in is in the human resources area. The part of the business that I love to do that in is around that workplace experience element, as specifically as it relates to what do we need to change to be successful as a modern organization that's going to embrace some sort of flexibility, whether that's a hybrid, which can be really tricky, or a fully remote, which can also be tricky in terms of compliance and legal. And so there's just a lot of nuances there, and that's an area that I really enjoy working in. And if we're going to talk about like who that's really suited towards, tech is often on the front edge of adoption with this stuff. And the reality is that while it's exciting to work with tech, I find that they don't need my help a tremendous amount. There's so much crowdsourced information out there. It's sort of in the DNA of a tech startup, and they have the tools inherently to figure this out. So where it's been really interesting to find that, there's customers that can resonate with this are in industries that maybe traditionally are a step or two behind where tech would be. Higher education.
Honey, those are like 15 steps behind, not 1 or 2 steps behind.
Yeah, right. Government,
local government,
banking,
finance, banking, insurance, things like this. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. And that's where I'm trying to focus, as who is my ideal customer. I think it's in that area. But I also want to say that as an early stage fractional, bootstrapped, independent, I've said yes to a lot of things outside of my ICP to stay afloat. And I want that message to come through for our listeners, because just because you know who you really want to work with, the ideal customer sometimes is the one that pays your bills. And that is okay. That is great. Like, this is a long game. If you're really in this because you want this to be your career path, it's a long game. And you may be in a situation where you say yes to things that you wouldn't say yes to 5-10 years from now. And that's all right. It's good.
And just have a buddy to text to when you're when you're having a hard time with it.
Yeah.
But it's all experience.
It is.
I've never been a very woo-woo kind of a person, but there's just been, ever since COVID, it's just the way people's brains function has actually changed. And I look at this like, well, no, there was something that I needed to learn from that client, because I'm going to be able to utilize that for a future fractional client. I think that there is, every time we get an opportunity, good, bad, or indifferent, we get more knowledge. So when I think about how we help business owners, CEOs, founders, VCs, it's like, even if they're not a steady Eddie on fractional, ask the results. It doesn't matter if it was a project or if it was a fractional or if it was an employee level, whatever, it doesn't matter. What are the results that they were able to produce in the roles that they were in during whatever time that they were in it? And that's really where you want to see, oh God, you got all of those results in 9 months? Then, that's the person you call. Instead of somebody who was there for 10 years, like, oh, you got that result in 10 years? It's like, I don't have 10 years. I don't know. It depends on the business. So I'm curious, the two of you got together just to chit chat. And then both of you started in fractional. Did you start in fractional and then you started chit chat?
So actually, Joshua and I were colleagues for the better part of 5 years. We worked side by side at a
remote company,
remote service agency. And I worked in talent, and Joshua was a product lead, and we collaborated on a number of open roles that we hired for and talked about remote strategy a lot. We both happen to live in Northern Idaho, so we have a proximity connection. So the first colleagues, friends, co-hosts, growing out of that.
And then fractional?
And then fractional after that.
So, why go fractional? Josh, you said that you did it because, and then, you're kind of on this little hiatus, and Lance, you're kind of still working through the rocky, ups and downs of really all of us of where this whole thing is going. But why did you guys decide to embrace, even if it's just 25% of your businesses, embrace the fractional component?
So we were working at this company together and actually really liking being part of the organization. I felt like I was outgrowing it. So I was looking for opportunities. I saw a startup. I jumped. I loved it. And then they had to let off 75% of the company. And I was talking to Lance, wrestling with this. And through Lance and some other connections, I landed 3 clients immediately. And I also landed a full-time job within a month. It was just miraculous. It all happened right at once. Lance and I were talking constantly through this period where I had a decision. Do I take the full-time job or try these 3 clients all at once, which then turned into 4, which then turned into 5, which turned into 2, which turned into 6, which turned into 0. And I wanted to just see where that would go. It was very interesting to me versus just taking another full-time job. In retrospect, the full-time job I took actually would have granted me a lot of flexibility. So that was a learning. Like the head of design was like, hey, Joshua, I don't care if you're doing freelance. Let's keep working together. And I was so overwhelmed, I quit on day 3 and just went full-time into a fractional. So that's a learning that I've had. Don't quit a full-time job just because you're 1 month into a fractional business. That's not necessarily going to scale. But throughout this time, I'm wrestling through this. Lance has given me lots of advice. Then Lance, I'll let you jump in with kind of your journey started close to the same time.
Yeah. So shortly after, and I'm watching Joshua's success with this, I am able to tell that my role is probably going away from the organization. There's contraction. Growing the team, having talent leadership there is not top priority. And my salary is probably on the top end of the team anyhow. So I'm definitely seeing this coming. So I began thinking, what am I going to do next? And I have a pretty non-linear, non-traditional resume. Like I said, I'm that problem solver. So I've found success in different arenas throughout my career, which means I'm not the obvious choice for any given arena, unless you just really care about problem solving. Then I'm a good fit for that. I started thinking that I want to do something independent as well. And I've had, over the last 7 or 8 years, a string of times where the organization that I was working with just didn't have the revenue to keep me or didn't have the revenue to take care of me the way they should. No shade on them, right? It's just the economics of it. And I just began to think, I don't trust that. While I'm watching what's happening to Joshua too, I just don't trust that there's an employer out there that I should put all my eggs in their basket. Just really, there's probably a lot better chance of me betting on me and trying to replace my income with a handful of customers. So that's what I did. And I was laid off. I saw it coming. It did happen. And fortunately, I had some time to really think through what I wanted to do, start networking. I was able to, retain my employer as my first customer, to a small degree, which was really helpful in giving some runway there. But those first few months were very scary. And I also don't recommend, right? Like a lot of times you don't have control over the situation. I didn't have control over the situation, but I do hear people saying like, I want to do fractional. I'm saying, don't quit your job right now. Build to that. You build yourself a little portfolio that you can step out onto, because I went into, a completely, empty portfolio when I was laid off. And that was really terrifying for me, a 1 income family of 5. That was a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. So it was really hard. And Joshua, you were with me the day that I did my
ski resort.
Yeah, we were up. So we both live in North Idaho. I was up at Schweitzer Mountain on a ski school day with our kids. And I took a call with a prospective customer, and I landed that very first deal with a really meaningful price tag on it. And it was an absolute game changer for me. I haven't looked back from there. I had a couple of months where there were no revenue. It was scary again, but I was able to lock in something else that has worked really well. It's been a roller coaster. There's a lot of up and down. Coming on 2 years in, just about. Year and a half. Feels better today than it did at the beginning. It's growing, and I do see this as a long game. I can see how I'll be where I want to be, but it just doesn't happen quickly. So, for people that are thinking, I'm going to get into this fractional thing, I can see how it works. I understand the logistics, right? You carve up your revenue into 4 or 5 or 6 slices, and it doesn't always just come together that way for you.
I will say, if you don't have the runway, right? If you know you have a year of time or savings put away or a dual income house and you have time to figure it out, that's far different than if you have about 2 months to figure it out. You're not being fair to yourself. You're not giving yourself a true chance to succeed at it. And maybe you win the lottery. That's fantastic. But otherwise, we had a recent guest who just advised us, no, you don't have 8 months of runway, like, don't put yourself through that stress. You're going to fail forward. That's totally acceptable, but just understand the implication of how much time you have based on your savings.
Absolutely. So, Lance, is there a story of what you've done for one of your clients that if there's a CEO listening that's like, I have a problem like that, and it's cool to listen to his solution? Like, can you give a kind of like here's what I walked into and here's what I walked out of?
Sure, I can give a couple of scenarios. Like, for one, where there's an organization with teams present in different countries, a lot of times we have a lot of vendors and services, and it becomes a pretty cumbersome machine that we use for talent management. In one scenario, being able to come in and identify like, hey, here's 3 or 4, services that everyone has to log into. It's a bill we have to pay. Like, let's consolidate this by trying something different, or let's move these 3 and consolidate into one that you already have, so we can have a lot less headache and we can get information on the same page. Because that's one of the real key problems when it comes to distributed workforces. You have informational isolation. You have people in group A that talk to each other in group A, and they have a process for group A, and then group B over here has got their own system and process, and then you have global or headquarters if you're hybrid. Do they always talk well to each other? Do they understand what's going on in these different places? So finding a place where we can have like a single source of truth, and we have a consolidation of our tools and our vendors into one place as much as possible, simplify that, and then come out on the other side. And employees are saying, oh, this is great. Like, my pay stub is all in one place. All my data is in one place. I can find my records when I need them. If I have to ask for time off, I know how to do that, right? And we're talking about tools like HRISs and ATSs and payroll platforms and global PEOs. So, I mean, if you're an HR person, you know what we're talking about. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of letters being thrown out there.
The PEO, I'm glad you said that last one, because I think too often people think that it's going to be a solution, period. I'm just going to hire this PEO and they're just going to be my HR team, right? They're just going to make it all happen. And I think that almost all fractional HR people just want to pull their hair out when CEOs and owners and founders think that way. And if you're only a 1, 2, 3 person organization, probably. But the minute you hit 10, oh dear Lord Almighty, if you're trying to do that with a PEO, you're shooting yourself. So the idea is that you kind of come in, you take the big 50,000 foot view of what are efficiencies, what are pain points, what are opportunities for productivity, and you kind of plan how to create something that's way more streamlined so that it actually causes less time for the employee, i.e. increasing productivity. And then on the same token, you're increasing the engagement because now people know where and how to get the information that was all disparate beforehand. That's the success story you're talking about today. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're creating a better experience for not only the individual contributors, or the maker somewhere down the line there, but also, if there's an HR team, they're breathing a little easier. Wow, I didn't have to keep up with all this stuff, right? Because sometimes stuff grows, especially with startups. Well, this was working when we were 10 people and now we're 30 people. And now that we're 60 people, let's add this. And so you get this Frankenstein's monster of HR tech and operational tech. And sometimes it's just really helpful to have an objective person to step in and say, hey, great, why do we use, service A, B, C, and D? Oh, well, A and B can actually do C and D. So let's just have 2 vendors or 2 service providers instead of 4. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. We didn't realize we can do that. Or you're right, we need to do that. We just haven't had the time. Great. Let me help you with that. We can do things like that. So yeah, that's an example. And I think that translates well to what's your recruitment and hiring process looking like? Struggling to get people in the door. All right, let's just do an evaluation of what's happening now. What are the opportunities? And then what does it take to implement those? So again, the differentiation between what I might do versus what a consultant might do, the consultant would come in and say, great, let's do an evaluation. Let's look at the opportunities. Here's what you should do. Good luck. And where I would say, here's what we can do. Let's work together on this. And then we would implement that.
I want to add in that There are people who can do everything he described in a certain way with kindness and caring. And that's the thing that I've seen from him, because when we worked together, we were in that similar situation. I was trying to lead a team. I was also an IC, and we would have these conversations where sometimes he would just be a listening ear while I would vent for an hour. He didn't necessarily have a solution that day for me, but I knew he heard me and he was trying to help me. And that's something I've really appreciated about Lance, is while doing all these things he's just described that I don't even really understand, that empathy as a person and that care has made a big difference for the organizations he's been part of.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really good point, Joshua, because it's something that those who have experienced it for a length of time in the diverse different work environments can bring that as the fractional leader, can bring the mentorship and the empathy and, the coaching that so often is needed. But because they're those hamsters on wheels and it's really hard to step off of it just to even get a drink of water, it's important that somebody recognizes that you are running in a circle and we want to be here to help you. And I recently, I can't remember who wrote the article. I don't want your job. I just want the work. A fractional just wants to come in and help you with the work. We don't want to take your roles. We want to help you get to the next level in your roles or the next level of your organization. Right. So it's, I think, the mindset of, well, you have more experience than me and you're going to tell me what to do. My role is to lift you up. My role is not to take your job. So I'm adding to the flames here. So
no, this is such an interesting element of the conversation because there's hard skills that anyone can learn to do, right? I mean, anyone can learn how to implement a human resource information system, but the element of, is there a lot of byproduct of good leadership, good management skills that's going to lift up the C-suite as a whole, because you're going to interact with them. Joshua, as a designer for early stage startups, you're sitting right there with the founder, the CEO, the CTO, and what are the elements that you're bringing as a partner and a human being in this project that they're not thinking that they're paying you for, but they're getting a tremendous amount of value from. And that's something that I think is a differentiator from maybe people who are just career executives in corporate. And I can't speak for all fractionals, but a lot of folks who I've met in this fractional community, they have something else. They have an entrepreneurial spark. They have great interpersonal communication. They have to run a business, and it's a service business. And so to be successful there, you're bringing in something that a senior leadership, a management, a C-suite, a team like that is going to benefit from, even though they don't think they're hiring you for that. This is just a new realization here that's happening for me.
Often what'll happen, I've seen this personally, and I've heard this from other colleagues, that the founders will say, hey, a fractional person, what do you see other companies doing when they wrestle with this problem? And they have this please help me, be a peer with me to try and figure this out. And the fractional can say, well, in a similar organization, we did this and it didn't work very well, or we did this and it worked really well. And that relief that I've seen personally, where the founder goes, okay, now that you've given me this, I can make a decision on which way we're going to go. And that's just Julia, a recent guest. She said this, basically, I've got you on this question. I've done this 20 times. Here's how it typically goes. And you're still the CEO, but let me just show you how I can help you. And the relief that these founders feel is fantastic. I love it.
It's interesting. I think all of us probably in our careers have worked for entrepreneurs or founder-led organizations. And so often they want their employees to act like an owner, right? They want them to have that level of investment into the success of their company. If you think about it, that's why Fractional would be fantastic for your founder-led company, because we actually have that entrepreneurial mindset. We have that risk tolerance that those who are employees usually do not have that level of risk tolerance. They might be a little more risk adverse. And I just think back to how many times, especially when the .com started and the .com busted and then the .com started again, and how they really wanted employees to act like owners. And, we'd give them phantom stock. We would do this, that, and the other thing, long-term incentives to try to get them to act like an owner and to put forth the heart and soul and efforts to make the company
It's all
grow.
a farce.
But it's a farce. But if you want that, if you truly want that, that's why you should talk to a fractional, because they're going to walk in and go, oh yeah, I totally get what you're looking for.
A fractional, the ceiling of their company and their stock is kind of it's not gated by that founder, right? And I've been in a situation where someone was letting me know, hey, you can be a true founder at my organization. There's like 10 people. And I had this conversation like, oh, what does that look like? Oh, 0.05% of the stock. Like, this will make such a difference. And that moment where I'm like, oh, I give all of my heart and soul, my best ideas, 15 years of experience, and maybe in 15 years I get $1 million. That's not interesting. That does not motivate me as a creative person. When I hear founder mentality at organizations, when the stock is split and diversified so far, I try not to roll my eyes visibly, but I feel it internally. That's just not how that works.
Unless you're one of the first 5, 6 people on the boat, if you really want your people to think like founders, they're probably going to go start their own businesses.
Exactly. Be careful what you ask for.
I will have one caveat to that to give a little grace to companies who say this. This concept of people have different stages of life, right? Maybe I have some personal thing going on in my life right now where even though I have that founder mentality, I need to just get a W-2 for a little while because of personal reasons. And then if that happens, a organization can greatly benefit from that person's ability. And what I would suggest to the founder, the CEO, is take that person in, allow them to shine for as long as they are able to, and then their situation is going to change and they're going to just ditch out again. Do not penalize them for that. Praise them for that, because you've captured a shooting star for a short period of time, and just be thankful that that happened. Some organizations see that and they reward it. Others, they get frustrated that you don't want to just spend 20 years for maybe $1 million at the end of the rainbow.
Absolutely. That's a great piece of advice, Josh. Is there any other advice that you would give to a small or medium-sized business owner about how fractional could support their business in any kind of level?
Yeah, I'll start with something just kind of riffing off of that. Try a quick test. See, go with your gut on the person's personality and just run a short test to see if something's going well and modify if it's not. The risk is much lower than a W-2 employee that you have to hire and fire and run through HR and all these processes. It's just a lower risk threshold. And then I would say, try and listen to them. They probably, depending on their personality, maybe they don't have a strong personality, but they have incredibly strong opinions. And so if you can open up and say, hey, let me know how you typically do this in other organizations, they are so excited to share. I had one situation with the founder where they did something unethical. And I actually wrestled with Lance with this. We were texting back and forth. I was trying to figure out what to do. And I finally, one-on-one, I told the founder I believe that was unethical. And I didn't imply malice, but more negligence. And the founder halfway corrected the problem and apologized and thanked me and said, please let me know in the future if I've done more of this. And that's a situation where they did create a space where I felt that I could let them know what I really was thinking, but I also did not call them out publicly and shame them, right? I guess the advice would be a fractional can change your entire organization. And if you've never done it, just try it for a short period, like a trial, and see how it goes.
It's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, I've got to jump on this train too. I was thinking, what advice would I give? And I think sometimes the fear for founders is that if you're working across multiple things, how do I know I've got your attention when I need you? Are you too divided on what you're doing? And this is how you keep a fractional highly engaged with you, is that you give them the best payment terms possible and you pay those on time. Because when the money's coming, it's really easy to be attentive to that organization. When the money's not coming, if you're behind on payments, if you're giving them 30-day, 60-day, 90-day terms, it's really hard to be engaged because you're not paying their bills. You want work for free, essentially, for the first 3 months. You're not paying their bills, and they need to get their bills paid somewhere else. And so that's where their attention is going to be. So give great terms, pay up front, pay in full. You'll get really great results that way.
That's a really good piece of advice. And you got to think, you kind of started about, would you give them the full attention? But come on, every one of us was working on multiple projects when we were W-2 employees. That is just what people have to do. Whether I decide to have 2 clients, 1 client, 5 clients, I also went into this business not to work 90 hours a week. So if I do happen to have 4 clients, I'm probably still only working less than 40. And the idea here is I am more available than if I was working on 4 projects and I was working 80 hours a week as your employee. So you're actually going to get more attention from me, most likely.
The way I've described it is you're not paying me for 40 hours. You're paying me for 17 years of experience at this point. If we can get all the crap out of the way, all the politics out of the way, and the useless meetings out of the way, we can move really fast. And if you're a founder, if you're not willing to do that, don't hire a fractional. If you're not sure how to do that, absolutely hire a fractional, and maybe they'll help you navigate how to cut out all that stuff.
Yeah, that saying reminds me, Josh, of, whenever you see somebody building something with their hands and it costs that much because it took me fucking hours, that's what it is. It's like you're paying for what's in here, not for my
There's this thing going around. There's this thing on Threads about why would a logo designer charge more than $1,000? And that's partly why I'm not in logo design anymore. I used to do it. It's like, no, yeah, it might actually take me 3 hours to do it, but I've been thinking about this for years, and that's where the benefit comes from.
So Lance, question to you about workforce planning. So we know that workforce planning is a multi-tiered component, right? We have the strategic vision of the organization, what that job content is and what the employee experience should feel like, all of that stuff. And then the job architecture, and then the outputs of training and recruiting and succession planning and all that stuff. So when we think about the strategy and we think about the job architecture, how do small companies shift their mindset instead of trying to find unicorn employees, or what I like to call Frankencorn, because all they're doing is pulling all the spare parts and sticking it together and going, look, it has a horn. How do we let these small and medium-sized business owners know that there is this world of fractional, and how can this benefit them even in like smaller roles?
Good question. Obviously, going way back to the education piece. When I started out on this fractional journey, I wrote a blog post and I pulled in quotes from a lot of different people who are doing fractional. And the idea is that you can get expertise that you're looking for in all these different areas that you don't have the budget to hire full-time people in if you'll consider fractional. How we get that message out to employers, well, I think this is one great effort. Our podcast is an effort for that. Presence on LinkedIn is an effort for that. To me, that's essentially the message: is you do need expertise. There is no unicorn, Frankencorn, whatever you want to call it, at a low budget, FTE cost that is going to be able to do a really great job across multiple areas of your business. So does the people function of your business deserve the expertise of a leader who has some time doing this kind of thing at this level? Absolutely, it does. Who usually ends up doing that? Well, in a tech organization, it's the engineer who's good with people. It's the designer who's good with people, and they end up getting shifted in there, and they care about people. They want to make a good experience for their colleagues. They want the company to do well, but they don't have the tools and the experiences to do that. They really need a leader at a senior level. But how can that, 20-person startup say, oh, we're going to go buy a VP of HR from the open market right now? They can't. So of course, the answer is grab someone like you, Carol, as a fractional VP of HR for that startup, or whatever they want to call it, head of people and culture. There's all kinds of different titles for it. But grab someone like you who can help them get set up, get on their way. And hey, if there is a QA professional who's really good with people and cares about this, maybe they can move into that, but they have your leadership to guide them and educate and train them. And if you do your job really great, that QA professional can be your HR manager. And a couple of years from now, maybe they don't even need you anymore. I think just the risk of we need full-time employees who can do so many different things is too great. Yeah, we need people who are specialists in different areas. And if you're a small organization or budget's a concern, don't buy the whole bunch. Pull off one banana, take it to the cash register.
I had one role. I was providing 40 hours a week of service for essentially a full-time job. And I looked back a year later when I was doing fractional. I was doing better than that quality of work as a fractional with a quarter of my time. And the reason was all the restrictions were moved and I was being trusted to shift the organization instead of just being a cog in a machine.
Yeah, that is a big one right there. And I think that Lance around the culture component probably has a thought about that. But I even remember, so I started my business in 2000. In 2014, I had a family issue where I had to kind of put my business on hiatus and I went back to being a W-2 employee for a short time. And I recall somebody saying, I think we need to get in a compensation consultant. And I looked at this person and went, I am a certified compensation consultant. I just did that for 14 years. Why do we need to bring somebody else in? It's the mindset of these owners of, you're an employee, you don't know, you're not the expert, but I'm going to.
You take orders.
Yeah. It just, where you do have people probably on your team who are looking for the opportunity to shine. And it's, I find that story still to this day just blows my mind. I'll never forget that conversation. And now, of course, I'm walking right back in going, I told you I knew what I was doing. So I want to ask each of you, what is the one question you wished I would have asked you so we could chat about it? Josh, I'll start with you.
What would I do with my life if I didn't work with clients? That's something I've actually thought about quite a bit. And I got into this career because I love making beautiful things that are helpful. That's kind of the designer artistic realm. I love helping people. I love just seeing someone's eyes light up because something I did was useful to them. In the client relationship, often those two things get missed, and that does get really tiring. So if I could never do that again, I would still continue to make art of some sort. Like I might make pottery, I might make ceramics, I might paint again. And then I'd love to see the joy of someone's eyes lit up because that was helpful to them. And so I try to go back to that often when I'm doing client work, when I'm helping companies. Is I love the book Essentialism from Greg McKeown. If I didn't need this job, how would I behave? And I try to think about that often. And when I've been fractional, I've behaved far more, hey, I don't need this job. And actually people listen far more. They're excited to hear what I have to say when I don't need the work. So anyway, there's a whole topic there, but I love thinking about that.
That's an awesome mindset. That's very interesting. And I bet you your energy dealing with your fractional clients was way more engaging and you probably saw more results out of it.
No comment.
Unpack that later. Lance, what about you? What's the one question you wished I would have asked?
What am I doing when the laptop is closed? Well, I've got, so this is just more the personal side for me, right? I've been married for 19 years this year. I've got 3 kiddos, 12, 11, and 6, and living up here in Northern Idaho. You can see the pictures behind me. You know, we love to be outdoors. We get in the mountains, and there's something magical that happens this time of year. It's the sun starts to shine, and it hasn't been like that for the past 7 months or so. No, sorry, 9. But the next 3 to 4 months, it's just the most magical thing. If you don't live somewhere like this, it's hard to understand that like this becomes the most incredible place to be for 4 months out of the year. It's amazing.
Until fire season starts.
Well, yeah. Smoke season might get here and derail that. Got a lot of camping, hiking, backpacking, mountain biking is something I love to do. In fact, this weekend, I'm going to go watch a downhill race down in Kellogg at Silver Mountain. I'm toying with the idea of maybe signing up for the just fun open class on Sunday afternoon. So
that mountain is terrifying, by the way. It's amazing. I've done it twice.
Oh my God.
I did a lot of cursing just to get down to the bottom.
Bless your hearts, you outdoorsy people. I would rather be underwater scuba diving or on the back of a horse. Those are my 2 things.
I will add on to that. When you're out in nature, you just get such a different context about the work you do behind a little tiny screen, right? Like, hey, there's more that matters here. So when I go back to that screen, I want to use that time wisely to make an impact and then get back outdoors. All 3 of us can, whatever type of outdoors that is.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank both of you guys for being on the podcast. So Joshua, you first. Where can people find you?
JoshuaWold.com. That's the best place. It has links to the podcast, links to I write often, and you can email me and then follow me on under that name. You'll follow me on Threads. That's probably in social media stuff. That's where I write the most these days.
And what about you, Lance?
Yeah, I'm most active on LinkedIn. Find me there, Lance Robbins. My website, lancehrobbins.com, and the Fractional.fm podcast, where all podcasts can be found.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, gentlemen, so much. Again, this has been the Fractional Edge podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to subscribe and share to all of your fellow CEOs, founders, PE firms, VCs, and let them all know about this fractional movement. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Fractional Edge podcast. We hope you had as much fun as we did in unraveling the mysteries of workforce planning and fractional executives. If you're feeling pumped to unleash your competitive edge, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow trailblazers, and subscribe to ensure you never miss out on our electrifying episodes. If you want to dive deeper into the wisdom shared on today's podcast, head over to our website, thefractionaledge.com, where we can help you connect with guests, explore exciting collaboration opportunities, and subscribe to our newsletter. Until next time, keep your business soaring, take care, stay inspired, and we'll see you on our next podcast.